Monday Night Football between the New Orleans Saints and Kansas City Chiefs comes down to two things, one of which the New Orleans Saints have been pretty good at, the other, not so much. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at a couple different things. Obviously, the New Orleans Saints playing tonight in Monday Night Football, but one of the biggest stories as well continues to be ongoing, and the New Orleans Saints seem to be firmly entrenched in that story, which is the Davante Adams pursuit. Apparently, the New Orleans Saints are the most aggressive in that pursuit. What does that mean? And how could this all just be posturing and positioning? We got all that coming up. We're also going to take a look at four things that you need to know ahead of the New Orleans Saints kickoff against the Kansas City Chiefs, including where they have advantages and disadvantages. We're going to kick everything off ourselves with taking a look at two things the New Orleans Saints must get right going up against Kansas City if they want to pull off the big upset: health, as well as explosive plays. One of those not going so great for New Orleans. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free today at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. If the New Orleans Saints want to get this big, monumental, shock the world kind of upset up against the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football, they're going to need two things: health and explosive plays. And the New Orleans Saints have been pretty okay when it comes down to explosive plays. Over 20, they're sitting at around the middle of the NFL in terms of those. But it doesn't just come down to how many they generate. It comes down to how many they allow as well. But I want to start with where the New Orleans Saints have shown their greatest sort of struggle so far this season, and that continues to be the same theme from this offseason, from training camp: health. The New Orleans Saints have trouble staying healthy, and this is becoming a big issue. There's no way the New Orleans Saints are not concerned about this at this point. During training camp, it was, everybody's getting acclimated, they're getting into football shape, this is happening around the league, all that other stuff. And I will say, injuries across the NFL are up. You're going to hear a lot about and from the NFL about how concussions are down, but then they're just conveniently not going to talk about the fact that injuries are up. So that's a league problem, and that's an NFL thing, not necessarily a New Orleans Saints thing. But the New Orleans Saints have been one of the teams, along with teams like the Chicago Bears, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Las Vegas Raiders, amongst others like the Miami Dolphins and others. I don't mean to leave anybody out of the conversation, but to sit here and name all the teams that are dealing with injury issues, well, that's an entire show, and you can check out Locked On NFL for more information on that. But when it comes down to the Saints, they're one of the teams that have been hit the hardest, right? Like, there's no doubt about it. They're without their starting center. They're without their starting right guard. They're about to start their third straight game with a different center at the helm. Eric McCoy 2 weeks ago, who was then replaced just 3 snaps in by Lucas Patrick. Then you've got Shane Lemieux, who started last week. And then now you're very likely going to have newly signed Connor McGovern be the guy that steps in to start for the Saints this week. So it'll be 4 different centers, 3 different starting centers in as many weeks. Not great. Then you add to the fact that the Saints are not only dealing with injuries in game, but they have had 6 injuries in practice over the course of the past 2 weeks. 3 wide receivers last week, with A.T. Perry dealing with a hamstring, Cedric Wilson Jr. dealing with an ankle injury, and then, of course, Chris Olave Friday of last week catching that hamstring injury that irked him, I guess I would say, over the course of that Atlanta Falcons game, but it certainly didn't stop him over the course of that Atlanta Falcons game. This week, we've seen guys like Lucas Patrick end up with an in-practice injury, which might keep him out for this game, which is what might lead to a whole new player in Connor McGovern stepping in at center for this team. Then you look at Taliese Fuanga, the starting left tackle, who had a knee injury added to the ongoing back tightness issue that he's been dealing with, but he has no game designation. He should be good to go. Dennis Allen telling us in the press conference on Friday that he will be fine, Fuanga. So not too much concern there, but still another thing added to the injury. And then, or another thing added to the injury report throughout the week. And then on Friday of this week, we saw a hamstring injury, another one for Pete Werner. So now you have these in-practice injuries continuing. You have these soft tissue injuries continuing. You'll notice that a lot of the New Orleans Saints injuries so far this season, going back to training camp and early on in the season, have been soft tissue. Hamstring, calf, groin have been the ones that have been the most sort of, I guess, common is fair to say. And so the Saints are having to navigate that as well. So that's 6 in-practice injuries for the New Orleans Saints over the course of the past 2 weeks. And it sounds like, or not even sounds like anymore, the team announced that hamstring for Pete Werner is going to keep him out in this game where the team is already without Wiilie, who got injured in last week's game in Atlanta, a hand injury that he clearly had some type of procedure on. We'll see how quickly he's able to get back to the field. But health continues to be a big concern for the New Orleans Saints, and they've got to start asking questions when it comes to that. It's not like you can completely change everything that you're doing mid-season. It's kind of have to be an off-season conversation, but the Saints brought in folks to help with soft tissue injuries, and they severely reduced those soft tissue injuries, or I should say substantially reduced those soft tissue injuries back in 2022. But then 2023, 2024, we're seeing calf injuries, hamstring injuries. What was the other one that I mentioned? Groin injuries, all those other things. Not great for New Orleans. The Saints will be without Pete Werner as well as Wiilie in this game tonight going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's tough because New Orleans is going to need to be able to control the middle of the field. They're going to need to be able to tackle at the catch point. Now, they do get Demario Davis back, which I think gives you a little bit of a net positive because you always want Demario Davis out there. Anthony Orji as well as DeMarco Jackson are going to be the other two guys to kind of step in to help out here at the position, both of which were really impressive throughout training camp. I thought DeMarco Jackson looked good last week when he got called up into more action over on the defensive side when the defense lost Wiilie Jr., who was already taking on a different role along with Pete Werner because Demario Davis was out, so on and so forth. So you get it, right? The second level of the New Orleans Saints defense could be a little bit in jeopardy here behind Demario Davis. We'll see how things go, but I think Orji and Jackson have played well. Let's see if they're able to continue it. And this is going to be a big one because limiting explosive plays and also generating explosive plays is going to be very important for this New Orleans Saints team. The Kansas City Chiefs so far have generated the third fewest explosive plays so far this season with just 16. They have not been the big play offense that you're used to. Don't let them become the big play offense if you are the New Orleans Saints defense. And the big key there is going to be making those tackles at the catch point, not allowing for yards after catch, and trying to minimize the impact of Travis Kelce, Kansas City Chiefs tight end, as much as possible. Kansas City Chiefs are going to be without some home run hitters in Rashee Rice, as well as Isaiah Pacheco, as well as Hollywood Brown. And so figuring out how to keep Xavier Worthy from having a big time career rookie game and keeping Travis Kelce as in check as possible is going to be vital for this New Orleans Saints team if they want to come up with the upset here. And then they're going to have to be able to generate explosive plays over on their offensive side as well, which is going to be a challenge. Kansas City, very good against the zone run. So New Orleans might have to focus on doing this in the air, and Steve Spagnuolo is not going to make that easy on Derek Carr in terms of pressure generation, Chris Jones, all these other things. So the Saints are going to have to be able to generate explosive plays, limit explosive plays, and stay as healthy as possible, right? Stay as healthy as they can going into this game, coming out of it, or coming out of this game as they went into it. And that's just something, that one in particular, the health question mark, is a massive question mark for New Orleans, who's really, really going to have to go back to the drawing board in terms of how they're either conditioning or whatever it is, right? I don't know what it is. I'm not smart enough to know that kind of stuff. But whatever it is, New Orleans is going to have to really, really address this over the course of the offseason. But I feel like we've said that each of the last few off seasons, and they got one good year out of it. We'll see what they end up figuring out moving forward. All right, coming up next, I want to dive into some of the advantages and disadvantages the New Orleans Saints head into when it comes to this game. So I want to go over 4 things you need to know before kickoff, leading off with Alvin Kamara and why he might not be the way that you can run your, or might not be the one you can run your offense through in this game. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs was to help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. And we're not talking about LinkedIn Jobs as just some other job board out there. LinkedIn Jobs helps you hire the professionals that you can't find anywhere else. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn for your new hires, you're looking in the wrong place. In fact, over on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses, which you may be one of, get qualified candidates within 24 hours of posting their jobs. So hire a professional like a professional over on LinkedIn. You know how important hiring is for your company. Your company is only as successful as the people that you hire to help make it happen. LinkedIn wants to help you find the right people that are good fits for you, that have the requisite experience, and they make the job easier too with a new tool, including those that help you write job descriptions, things like that, just faster, quicker, easier, and more successful when you use LinkedIn. So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. The show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's spooky season, so what is it that you're afraid of? Or is it the fear of sharing your fears, big or small? Maybe that's the thing that you're already afraid of, right? Like it's easy in Halloween to kind of have fun and kind of maybe even poke fun at some of the things that typically scare us, but sometimes you got those fears that don't really involve like zombies and ghouls, right? So how do you manage those? How do you explore those? Well, therapy is a great tool to kind of help you find ways to not only explore them, not only confront them, but in some cases overcome them as well. I know that's been a big benefit for me when it comes to therapy, the things that I'm most afraid of, the things that guide me. BetterHelp has been awesomely helpful in all of that, just in terms of allowing me to have something that's accessible, something that's entirely online, that's designed to be suited to my schedule, that also allows me access to licensed therapists to get the help that I'm looking for. So go and check them out today yourself. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon so you can get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, family, I got 4 things you need to know ahead of kickoff for the New Orleans Saints and Kansas City Chiefs. And the first thing that I want to lead off with is why the Saints might have a little bit of a hard time running their offense through Alvin Kamara, what that means for them, and how that ends up kind of impacting the way that this game could go. We got that coming up for you here as we continue on today. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen and joining us here on this game day episode. Just a quick reminder, we'll be live after the game, which will also be Tuesday's episode because I'm like flying out basically hours after I leave the stadium. So we'll be live after the game, either from the press box or down on the field. We'll see how the Kansas City Arrowhead Wi-Fi is down there, but give you everything you need to know from this game, win or lose, and then we'll have a new episode for you fresh coming up on Wednesday as well. If I can do a little something extra on Tuesday, I will. I don't know if I'll be able to, depending upon flights and all that other stuff. So I'll keep you up to date, and we'll do our usual thing here, making sure you're getting everything that you need on Locked On Saints. So listen, I think that the Saints run game is going to not have as easy a time as we saw in the first 2 weeks up against the Dallas Cowboys, as well as the Carolina Panthers in reverse. Carolina Panthers and Dallas Cowboys. And then, they had a pretty good kind of command of the run game last week in Atlanta. And I think going up against Kansas City is going to create some issues for New Orleans when it comes to running the football. It doesn't mean that they can't be successful there, but it's just a piece of the matchup to really watch in this one. Alvin Kamara may not be the person you can run your offense through, at least not necessarily in the run game, no pun intended. The New Orleans Saints, according to our friends over at Fantasy Points and their excellent data suite, lead the NFL in zone run attempts with 82. In the meanwhile, the Kansas City Chiefs rank number 7 against zone runs, 3.55 yards per carry allowed against the zone run scheme. So that's going to be a little bit of a limiting matchup for New Orleans. Now, I will say that on the flip side of that, New Orleans defense has done a very good job of defending the man or gap scheme runs, which Kansas City runs most often in their offense. So really on both sides of this conversation, we're talking about the defense and the run defense being well matched against the opposing rush offense. What's going to make the difference for New Orleans is not necessarily just how they block Chris Jones, who of course is going to move all around the line and things like that, but it's going to be about who wins against the end. So the end is kind of the first read for Alvin Kamara in these zone runs. That's typical of the zone run fashion. You're trying to push to that tight end on the outside of the tackle. And really your first read in the outside zone run is going to be that defensive end. This is something that John Gruden also broke down as well over on, it's the, the Fired coaches association or whatever, super funny stuff from John Gruden. But you push towards the outside, and then if that defensive end gets the outside of your tackle, then you're probably cutting back inside if your offensive tackle, sorry, if your interior is winning against a defensive tackle. So when Chris Jones moves to the outside, you might end up with a bit of a better matchup and opportunity to win and then be able to get to the outside. Whereas when he's on the inside, the biggest thing is, can you keep him from kind of getting that quickest line, point A to point B, along the interior to Alvin Kamara? He can be really disruptive rushing from the inside and kind of breaking up the cutback opportunity if the tackle loses the end to the defensive end, which is going to happen, pretty often, right? Like that's typically a stalemate situation to where either you're able to seal the outside or you're not able to seal the outside. That comes down to alignment, all these other things. And so Alvin Kamara could be looking, if that end wins the contain or the win on the outside of the tackle, then he's got to be able to cut back to the inside. That's where Chris Jones can make things a little bit messy. So that's why I think that Kansas City does a really good job matching up against the zone run, is because of sort of the disruption that they can create on the interior and then the speed that they can have over on the edge. So definitely a big thing to watch out for. Maybe that means that you get Alvin Kamara a little bit more kind of utilized and involved in the passing game to kind of help you out with all that. The second thing that I want you to know is something we mentioned earlier in the show, is that the Saints could be starting their third different center in as many games. They had Eric McCoy 2 weeks ago, Shane Lemieux last week, and then this week we could see Connor McGovern, who the Saints just signed this week, potentially stepping up to start at center while Lucas Patrick manages his injury that set in during the practice week. So we'll see where things go when it comes to the Lucas Patrick situation. He's questionable going into this game. I don't currently have any news about whether or not he's playing. That might come out after I'm done recording here, though. So we'll see where things go. The good news around McGovern is that he's very familiar with Gary Kubiak and that run system. He's very familiar, which is a part of what the Saints are doing. He's very familiar with Rick Dennison, who is the run game coordinator for the New Orleans Saints now, and of course spent time with John Benton over in New York, kind of running a similar wide zone rushing system, found some early success with Breece Hall, things like that. And so he brings a lot of familiarity and understanding to the team. The big thing is going to be the connection between he and Derek Carr and what the responsibilities are, right? Like if Eric McCoy was doing things like making checks and making calls at the line of scrimmage, can the guy that just showed up during the week of practice come in and do that and alleviate Derek Carr of some of those responsibilities? Or is that more stuff that Derek Carr has to take on pre-snap, all these other things? So just some stuff to consider there in terms of the connection between center and quarterback and how that impacts Derek Carr. But in terms of the run game and the fit there, he should be a pretty solid fit when it comes to that. Speaking of Derek Carr has not had very much success against the Kansas City Chiefs. 3-14 over the course of his career, including 1-7 up against Patrick Mahomes in those head-to-head opportunities. So that's something that you're looking at in this one, although quarterbacks don't tell the full story in terms of wins and losses, right? So we do have to keep that in mind. And remember that while Derek Carr was playing against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs over all those years, that team never had better than a 20th ranked defense either. Not ideal when you're going up against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. However, New Orleans yardage wise ranks around that same territory right now, but scoring wise is where they have been excellent against the pass and of course as against as a defense as a whole. Interestingly, Derek Carr also 1-8 in Arrowhead Stadium over the course of his career. His one win came during the 2020 season where there were only just over 13,000 fans in attendance. So really you could say that Derek Carr's other sort of losses in Arrowhead have come against the Kansas City fans, right? And that environment and things like that. So that doesn't tell you that the Saints are going to lose the game or anything like that. It's not really a shot at Derek Carr or anything. It's just interesting to kind of see, like, he's the one of the guys with the most experience on the offensive side going up against Kansas City. And it just goes to show you that Kansas City is a tough team to beat. Even though they're not the team early on this season, more turnovers, lower average depth of target, less explosive plays. They're not the team that they typically have been. They're still a really, really good football team. So don't let anybody fool you. And then finally, this game may come down to the passing game for this one. As we mentioned earlier, it's going to be all about sort of the explosive plays and things like that. But it really comes down to your ability to limit those explosive plays, and in particular in the passing game. So I expect this one maybe not necessarily to be a shootout in terms of on the scoreboard, but I wouldn't be surprised to see both quarterbacks go over 35 passes attempted in this game, just based on the potential disadvantage that each offense may be at when it comes to where each opposing run defense is at its strongest, right? So taking away the run game might force more passing. I don't know that that's going to mean more points because both of these defenses are solid when it comes to limiting points, but it certainly could mean a little bit of a shootout in terms of attempts by each of these quarterbacks. So definitely something to watch here. We might be in for some fireworks, or we might be in for a lot of incomplete passes or dink and dunks and all these other things. We'll see where this game ends up going. But I expect this one to be pretty low scoring, regardless of who ends up winning it. All right, coming up next, I want to change gears here and then get to the Davante Adams conversation again, because wide receiver Davante Adams is expected to be those conversations, trade conversations are expected to heat up over the course of the next 24 hours or so. So let's dive into that, because the New Orleans Saints have apparently been the most aggressive. What does that mean? We got that coming for you next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at DoorDash, my favorite on-demand delivery platform. I get meals delivered with DoorDash all the time, especially when I'm out of town. You better believe. I got some recording this morning. Definitely going to have some lunch on the way coming here to the hotel in Kansas City. DoorDash has been a lifesaver in a lot of different situations, whether I'm out of town or I'm just at home and busy. And it's not just food that you can get delivered with DoorDash. You can check out convenience stores, things like that are around your area for your home needs and things like that too. I absolutely love DoorDash. They have come through clutch for me, the way that the best teams in the NFL come in clutch for their fans. I am a big fan of DoorDash. You go and check them out today. Download the app and use the promo code LOCKEDFALL24. Use the numbers 24. For 50% off, up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Limited time offer. Terms apply, and promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now and order your game day favorites. Must be 21 or older to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select markets. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints have apparently been the most aggressive team in the pursuit of Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver Davante Adams. Does that mean that they will land him? No. But does it show that this New Orleans Saints team is very interested in getting better? Yes, that does end up being a big part, as long as that is true. Let me introduce you to a little bit of a concept called public posturing in negotiations. Now, you already know this concept very well because you've seen it all around the NFL for years and years and years and years. But this does happen sometimes. Who is the source that's giving out the information that says that the New Orleans Saints are being the most aggressive in their pursuit? Is that somebody genuinely from the Las Vegas Raiders saying, yeah, no, like we think this is happening, but the New Orleans Saints have been very aggressive in trying to land Davante Adams? If so, that could be good news, just in terms of showing that the New Orleans Saints have a desire to improve here and bring in a player that would indeed make them a better football team. It's not that they struggle if they don't get him, but they certainly get better if they do get him. We spoke the same way about Justin Simmons or over the course of the offseason. A guy that clearly makes your defense better, but a guy that if you didn't get, doesn't make your defense worse because you didn't get him, right? So the same thing kind of happens here with Davante Adams. You still have Chris Olave, you still have Rashid Shaheed, but you really want that third wide receiver option, or you want one of those guys to be your third wide receiver option. So if you have a Chris Olave and a Rashid Shaheed on the outside and Davante Adams and the great things he can do for you from the slot, lining up on the inside, but then the versatility to move all three of those guys around, there's something that we're cooking, right? We're cooking when we talk about something like that for any NFL team, but I could see that really working out for the New Orleans Saints as well. So, let me tell you a little bit about where these reports are coming from. So NFL Network's Ian Rappaport said that the New Orleans Saints were the most aggressive team. Adam Schefter of ESPN said that the Saints and the New York Jets are the two that are considered the favorites to land Davante Adams. Now we know how this goes, right? Oh, it's down to two teams, the New Orleans Saints and the Atlanta Falcons, and swoop, here come the Cleveland Browns. And that, of course, is a reference to what happened with the Deshaun Watson pursuit, which thank goodness that did not work out for the New Orleans Saints, because there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Deshaun Watson has been terrible. And so good thing the New Orleans Saints kind of dodge that issue by not landing him thanks to a fully guaranteed contract from the Cleveland Browns. So that ended up working out. And there's always the chance that that kind of thing happens in these situations. And that's fine. I think what you're looking for here is, are the New Orleans Saints involved in a pursuit that they should indeed be involved in? You can check that box. And are they being aggressive to try to make that happen? It sounds like you can check that box. Now, I mentioned earlier the public posturing, right? So if that source is coming from, somebody that is really kind of laying out like, hey, here's how the negotiations are going so far, the conversations are going so far, then that gives you, a pretty good indication in terms of good news for the New Orleans Saints. The other big thing that you're looking for in this one is what if that source is just trying to say, hey, the New Orleans Saints are being the most aggressive, which then drives the Jets to be more aggressive in their pursuit. Because the Jets are, I think, far and away still considered the favorite when it comes to land Davante Adams, because you have the Aaron Rodgers situation there. You have a London game where, boy, it sure looked like they could have used a Davante Adams-like type receiver instead of all the drop passes and things like that. But also, Aaron Rodgers didn't really look like he was at his best either. Kind of got pulled back up on his knee at one point, all these other things, or on his leg at one point, all these other things. So, is that really the best landing spot for Davante Adams? We don't really know yet, right? Because the Jets look an awful lot like the Jets as opposed to an Aaron Rodgers, successful Aaron Rodgers-led team. So that could be a bit of the public posturing and negotiation to say, hey, look at how aggressive the New Orleans Saints have been in order to maybe pull more out of the New York Jets, make them match their aggression. The thing about it in this one that I think works against the New Orleans Saints is the same thing that we've discussed over and over again, the salary cap, right? The New York Jets have the salary to just sneak Davante Adams right in under that salary cap and then be fine. The New Orleans Saints might need some help, or at least need Davante Adams to agree to a restructure to help facilitate the trade. I think Davante Adams, in terms of getting out of Las Vegas, would probably be willing to do that. But it doesn't sound like the Raiders are super willing to eat any of his salary in the process. So that could make things a little bit more difficult for the New Orleans Saints. But they could also be why they're getting more aggressive, right? Like, yeah, we know that you don't want to eat that extra salary cap, but to help you out with that, here's this extra piece or this amount of picks, or instead of a second round pick that you're asking for, here's a first round pick, like cough it up, all those other things. That could be a way that the New Orleans Saints end up going. Do I think that a first round pick for Davante Adams on what could potentially be at best a 2 or 3 year kind of relationship? No, I don't think that's the greatest decision in the world, if I'm being honest, because the New Orleans Saints will need to continue to build their offensive line. They need to find more talent at wide receiver for their future. They need to find more talent on their defense for the future as well. But a lot of people have kind of looked at this and said, well, the New Orleans Saints first round picks haven't always panned out, which is the case for every NFL team. So maybe going and getting a veteran with that pick that is more likely to pan out because he's done it at the NFL level feels like that might be a better situation. People are all over the map on that. I could go either way on it, but I think a second round pick and then additional pieces is really the way to go here. So the Saints being aggressive could mean willing to give up that first round pick, which I don't think that's the case because otherwise the trade probably would have already happened in that case. But that second round pick plus all this other stuff. And oh, by the way, help eat some of that salary. So that might be why, if the New Orleans Saints are indeed the most aggressive team in this conversation, and that's not just public posturing to try to milk more out of the New York Jets, that could be why, right? Because they need the help with the salary cap. So they have to be aggressive. They have to pay up a little bit more because of those needs. So that could be the way that this all goes or is going for New Orleans, but definitely something to watch because I still do truly believe that if you get Davante Adams, your team gets better. And then as your offensive line gets healthier, your team gets better. The health question mark is a whole other, question mark. Unfortunately, it's a whole other ball game when it comes down to this team. But if you have the opportunity to add a player that's going to make you better, then I think you take the opportunity to add that player that's going to make you better. So the expectation is that the Davante Adams deal, whatever it eventually looks like or does look like, that ends up probably ramping up after tonight's game, going into the next day or two. I think teams are trying to maximize the amount of snaps, practice, availability, all this other stuff that they can get out of Davante Adams. But I don't. So I think trying to get him into a building before Wednesday is kind of what everybody's looking to do, right? Or for Wednesday is kind of what everybody's looking to do. He is dealing with apparently a legitimate hamstring injury that is expected to be better by next week or maybe the week after. So I think every team is looking to maybe get him in the building, get that evaluated, and figure things out in terms of getting him on the field for that team as much as possible, especially when you're giving up high picks and being aggressive and all these other things. So something to watch out for. Just because the New Orleans Saints are the most aggressive doesn't mean that they're the most likely to land him, doesn't mean that they will land him, but it certainly shows, if that is true and not that public posturing negotiation stuff we were just talking about, certainly shows the New Orleans Saints are intent on continuing to get better and believe indeed that they are a competitor in this field. They have a real opportunity to prove that tonight against the Kansas City Chiefs, but that will be a very tall task for them. Let's see if they'll pull it off. One way or another, though, we'll be live at Arrowhead Stadium here in Kansas City following the game. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL. It was an exciting week of NFL football. Make sure that you go and get the recap with the Madman Tyler Rowland and by chopping it up in the barbershop with our good friend Tony Wiggins. 2 shows a day over at Locked On NFL. Appreciate you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.